Obviously, people have different opinions on limiting personal freedom, right? Both expression and consumption of pornography, right? But moving that aside and just focusing on things through the lens of biology and the dopamine system, we know that the more stimulating, the more intense an experience, the greater the increase in dopamine. If somebody is consuming, let's call it very intense, AKA high dopamine releasing pornography on a regular basis, what do we know? That peak in dopamine will start to lessen. It'll be lower and lower, and the trough in dopamine after they view that pornography will be deeper trough and longer trough, meaning they are very likely, we don't know for sure, but very likely to seek out more and more intense experiences to try and just get them back to baseline. Pretty soon, the pornography that at one time was very stimulating for them is no longer stimulating. Very stimulatory, high dopamine releasing activities and pornography and things like that increase dopamine, but repeated exposure to that, regardless of the activities occurring during that time, lead to big, long troughs in dopamine, such that more stimulation is required just to get any sense of arousal. We also know that prolactin, when that is increased, tends to create a kind of subdued lack of dopamine. I'm using these terms broadly, kind of amotivated, non-motivated state. So let's go back all the way to this question about pornography. What's the typical scenario? Well, this is not something I choose to think about a lot. You're talking about some individual in their apartment or home watching intense dopamine stimulating pornography in which they presumably are aroused or not aroused. They do or don't do whatever they choose to do, but that over time has less and less of an effect in getting them aroused. And keep in mind that none of this necessarily translates to real world human safe interactions between individuals, right? Pornography is very, very different than real world sexual interactions. Is pornography dangerous? Is it bad, etc.? I think the thing that we can say for sure is that any behavior, any substance that stimulates a lot of dopamine and that is easily accessed without effort is potentially problematic. Again, big increases in dopamine that are not preceded by effort are potentially problematic. There's a lot of judgment, and understandably so, because people arrive to this sort of discussion with a lot of different backgrounds in terms of religious backgrounds and what they think is okay or not okay. What I can tell you for sure is that I hear from a lot of young males about their challenges with porn addiction, and they want to know how to get over porn addiction. And the answer there is difficult, but very simple, which is abstinence. It's abstinence. It's taking a period of abstinence from pornography, maybe forever, maybe reducing the amount. This is where it gets very tricky, very subjective, and it's almost impossible to kind of have the discussion without getting into some murky territory.
Yeah.
But it's a real issue. And I know it's a real issue because I hear from thousands over the last few years of the podcast. I've heard from thousands of males that are like, they were addicted to porn. It sounds to me as if they feel very dejected. And some of them actually have said they felt very kind of misled, like almost like this thing, this natural stimulus for them was dangled in front of them and they just gravitated towards it the same way that any biological organism would gravitate towards something that was triggering its dopamine system. And now they feel depleted and kind of stuck and they don't know what to do. I'm not getting a ton of YouTube comments and emails from people saying, hey, I really struggle with, with ribeye steak addiction or with coffee addiction or energy drink addiction, maybe a little bit with energy drinks, but it's not crashing lives. It's not causing people to feel depressed, miserable about themselves. It's not causing people to have sexual dysfunction issues in real world interactions. I mean, this is also the concern, right? That young people are getting so attuned to certain dopamine dynamics related to pornography that they don't either get aroused or know how to handle real world intimate interactions. Can pornography be consumed by certain people in a healthy way? Well, probably yes. Do a lot of people get carried away with it and it starts to become a detriment in their lives? Maybe even an addiction, maybe even impede other aspects of romantic and workplace behavior. Yes, we hear this all the time. I do hear about this concern from people a lot. I think that it's hard to imagine more benefits than kind of concerns or risks when it comes to pornography, especially for young males. Somebody wants to find something on the internet, they just Google for it and they can find it. I think you want particular food that's extremely tasty, you can order it to your door. This is not potentially problematic, this is problematic. What it requires ultimately, however, I believe, is self-regulatory mechanisms. There is no way that legislature is going to prevent us from having access to things. It's just not, because people have always found a way. There's consumption of porn, and I think that successful individuals will learn and understand this relationship about dopamine, especially their own, and they will learn to regulate, and they will be very careful about anything that spikes dopamine really high without much preceding effort and that has the capacity for addiction. So I worry far less about the energy drink, the loud music, and the workout, far, far less, maybe not at all, than I do high-intensity pornography consumed on a regular basis, people taking prescription stimulants who don't need them. I mean, that's a recipe for burnout, depression, or worse. Many, many people are struggling nowadays from what we hear of as the isolation crisis. But all it takes is one trusting, reliable relationship to start to shift that in the right direction. I am so adamant about this. One of the most powerful things that anyone can do, believe it or not, is to have someone each morning that they text good morning to. I know this is going to sound trivial, corny, and I'm happy to take the heat on this one. Find a friend, and in particular, men who lack friends completely, because there's a greater percentage of those, although it's certainly the case that many young women and women are lonely as well. Find someone who you can communicate with each morning. Just a good morning text. Seriously, this is one of the most powerful things you can do, to check in with another member of your species each morning. You don't have to have a conversation. You don't have to talk about what you're going to do each day. Knowing that someone else out there in the world cares about us each morning when we wake up makes us feel incredibly part of the tribe.